Hi, I'm Mal from the Money Study, bringing you another episode of our Take 10 Challenge, up to number 83, buying your first home. There's our disclaimer: facts, figures, information only. This is not advice. Okay, buying your first home, what a decision. And you've only got to pick up the paper or listen to the news or anything out there at the moment. Everybody's talking about it, how difficult it is indeed for people to buy their first home. It's become a huge problem. And of course, the problem is for the younger people: do we wait? Is this bubble ever going to burst? Are we going to see house prices in Australia going to come down? And of course, no one knows. No one knows. The government really aren't doing anything, and have nothing. Either side of Parliament done nothing for years and years and years, and everything they do just exacerbates the problem. I'm not going to get political, but really all they've done is muck around the edges. No one's prepared to do any tough decisions. Closest they got was Labor bringing to the table, getting rid of negative gearing and so forth. But everyone just sort of held it down, or the Libs came out and said what was eating into the profits of nurses and policemen and so forth. I think we need to do something, and I do believe that some of these tax incentives have really gone too far. Is it really fair that someone can have a dozen houses and get tax deductions on a dozen houses and so forth? Yep, one or two, but perhaps put some sort of a limit on it. But all it's really doing is in making it easier and easier for the investor, and harder and harder and harder for the first home buyer. So this whole question of do we buy now or do we wait is obviously something that no one can answer. And of course, anyone who's been waiting only found that the problem got worse and worse and worse over the last decade. And who would have thought that house prices would have gone through the roof during during COVID and so forth? But that's what we're ended up with. Now, in theory, you would think with higher interest rates, we're going up and up and up. And yes, they've levelled at the moment. They're talking about interest rates coming down. And of course, if interest rates do come down, that could mean that there'll be another flurry into people buying houses. I'm not convinced that interest rates will fall that quickly. I think hopefully that the Reserve Banks have learnt their lesson. They can't keep interest rates so low for so long without generating some sort of problems, being that people can buy houses at ridiculously low interest rates, which is great for the investor. So all of these things got impacts. And so we'll talk about other ways that we can get into the housing market over the next few sessions or so. But I think this first question is one of those ones you'll never have the right answer to. You've really just got to make a decision, and you'll only know in hindsight whether you should have waited or not. You can never kick yourself for hindsight. So if you do buy and the house prices drop, well, I suppose what you've got to do then is look at the scenario that this is a house, you're into the housing market, you're in it for the next 30 or 40 years perhaps, in which case, invariably, yes, you might take a bit of a dip now, but you would expect houses prices to then come back at some point. So house prices are very expensive compared to wages. It's as a proportion of the total household expenses, they have become nosebleed territory. We're getting to some of the highest levels they've ever been in comparison to incomes. And any time that does occur, then something, generally speaking, happens. Everything sort of moves in cycles. And when we get to extremes, I mean, it's easier to say that there's demand, and of course we know there's demand out there. But if people can't afford it, then literally what it comes down to is you can have all the demand in the world, but if people can't afford it, then effectively they stop buying. And if the investor steps in, but then interest rates get too high and their yield, people can't afford higher rents, then even the investor's going to step back. So in theory, love that word, we would expect at least house prices to perhaps stagnate, which would at least give a bit of a pause for those people trying to get in. There's been some downward pressure on houses prices to a degree, in the fact that banks have been tightening up their lending procedures with these higher interest rates. They are now imposing, the fact that you need to borrow, be able to afford to pay debt back at least 2% above the current rate, which could push people to need to be able to prove that they could pay it back if interest rates were up around about 8 or 9%. And that's certainly going to preclude some people from borrowing money. And so if the banks aren't lending the money out, again, this is also should, in theory, put a bit of pressure on house prices. But I say this has been the theory for a while, and we're not really seeing the impact of it to any great degree as yet. But let's look at the issues around that if we are deciding to buy, the sort of thought processes that we should start to put into place. I think one of the number one things, if we're trying to save money on buying a house, then we need to ensure that the house we're going to buy is indeed a bargain. Not necessarily we're going to go and buy the crappiest house available, but we are going to buy one that we know is good value. So if you become an expert in your preferred area, so rather than just say we're looking for a house perhaps, look at the suburbs and the areas that you believe you really could legitimately afford to purchase a house in the future. And effectively what you do there is become an expert. So you get onto Domain and realestate.com and all these other real estate websites and start looking. Even if it's, even if you think it's going to be 2 years away before you can even do anything, I still don't think it's too early. You might get a bit excited and a bit keen, of course, but the idea is that if you can start to get a really good feel for the area that you are buying in, so that you look at the house prices, you see what type of house is going for what price and what street even. And we did this when I moved to Canberra back in 2004, and we spent months and months before we actually came to Canberra to look at the suburbs that we were considering, and we just looked and looked and looked, and then we were coming up to basically purchase. We'd had a short list, the ones that we believed that fitted our criteria and so forth. We came up, looked around, and we were able to make a pretty fast decision because we'd already worked out that these houses, compared to ones that had sold recently, or other ones in the area and so forth, was good value for money. You might say, gee, this one's got a garage where the other one only had carport, and yet it's the same price, or whatever the case may be. But you get a good feel for it. Therefore, you know that this is going to be good value. So when the time comes, you can make your move, and you can make your move with a bit of certainty, a bit of confidence, and you might better beat the people to the punch by jumping in quickly and so forth. So become an expert. It doesn't hurt, and start early on that one. Because you're going to buy a house, you're going to buy a unit, you're going to buy a townhouse, or you're going to buy off the plan. Now, obviously, this is probably pretty much not really coming down to what you want, probably more coming down to what you can afford. And of course, depending on your area, buying a house might be totally out of your price bracket. That's for sure. But generally speaking, if money wasn't an issue, houses, it's the land value that goes up over time. Generally speaking, better than the actual house price itself. So you can normally expect the houses to maintain their value better than units and so forth, literally because there's that scarcity of land. But I say probably, going to come down to what you can afford to do. Not keen in buying off the plan. I'll be talking about this a little bit later on. Basic buying off the plan is you're buying something that hasn't even been built yet. And in theory, you can save money because the builder is getting his money up front with a deposit and so forth. He doesn't have to turn around and advertise. So he gives a bit of a discount, but you're buying something that you can't walk through. You can't see the quality of the finishing. You can't see what the view looks like. You can't see the quality of the workmanship and so forth. So, and of course there can be delays. There can be cost blowouts. All sorts of other things can happen. Not a big fan in today's situation with what's going on with builders, and a lot of turmoil out there at the moment. With prices of materials going through the roof, this is causing dramas I would rather myself effectively, buy something that's ready to go. Could you stay at home while you save? Obviously, a great idea if you get on well with your parents. But if you are going to stay at home, look, even though you're trying to save, at least offer them some board. Don't just freeload. If you're working, if you can afford to buy a house, you've got reasonably good income, then please pull your weight. Now, of course, your parents might be nice enough to put that money aside and help you out with a house later on, perhaps, or give it back to you as a loan, or whatever the case may be. But if they just take it, don't think that they're greedy. They've actually considered their retirement situation, and they can't just keep on feeding you and perhaps your partner as well. Use some calculators on the Money Smart website. There's some really good mortgage calculators, and what can you afford, and what would be the repayments, all that sort of stuff on the Money Smart website under calculators. And I love those calculators because with Money Smart you don't get all the advertising like you do on bank websites and so forth, and you don't get contacted and hit with all sorts of other emails that you don't particularly want. So we're going to go through all the various different issues, obviously, and as an investor or as a first home buyer, we're going to go through loans. We're going to go through all the bits and pieces involved with purchasing a house, and we'll be doing that in bits and pieces in upcoming sessions. Happy for us to come and have a chat to us at any time, but look forward to you joining me on another session.